Hi everyone. So a guy called Lewis has called into LBC to explain to Nick Ferrari the offending scene that caused so much controversy surrounding Basil Fawlty and Fawlty Towers. So let's hear what he had to say.
This Fawlty Towers episode, or generally, as the contributor said, you could look at treatment of Spaniards as well. Do you think it's time to put a curtain over it, draw a veil over it, I should say?
I'm a massive Fawlty Towers fan, and I'd be really disappointed to see it go. The Germans episode, it's not the Germans that's caused the problem. There's a scene earlier on where the Major is talking about cricket.
I know I can rely on you not to say those words, and he used vile terms as to people from a different country. He takes his girlfriend or a partner to see. I remember, and I know I can. Yes, indeed, yes.
And it's that scene that's contentious. I think it's actually. I think if you watch Fawlty Towers on Netflix, that scene's been cut. You don't see the scene anymore. Yes,
right, probably right.
And I'd imagine that UK TV probably will do that. They'll put the episode back, but they will cut that scene because it's that scene that's causing the problem.
Right. Okay.
And if you watch it, I've still got some old DVDs, but if you watch those, it's still in there, and it's really quite jarring. And it does, like you say, it goes back to Love Thy Neighbour, and the sort of stuff that's fallen out with the times.
So the idea of removing a scene from a TV show that was set in the 1970s, for me, is a problem. Because the comedy of the 1970s is completely different to the comedy that we have today. Certain expressions, certain jokes, certain things that ordinary members of the public would hold, opinions they would hold, or positions they would hold, were considered acceptable back in the 1970s, but would not be tolerated today. But that's part of the comedy. The way that certain people have held certain positions. We can even laugh at how stupid those positions are today. But at the time, they were considered normal positions to hold. Now, a certain character in Fawlty Towers, I forget his name, O'Brien I think his name is, he's an Irish builder, and he's actually played by a famous Irish actor. But in Fawlty Towers, he's unreliable and he's crap, and he's continually criticized for that, and on a number of occasions he's insulted because he's Irish. Now, am I offended by that? No, because it's comedy. It's not intended to offend. It's a joke. But it's based on something that was probably considered normal at the time. So in the 1970s, Irish builders were considered unreliable, considered, their work was considered shoddy. Now, what's ironic is in the show, Basil Fawlty continues to hire him, even though he does a crap job. Why? Because he's cheap. So, in a sense, the joke is somewhat switched back onto the English hotel owner, because even though the Irish guy is ridiculously, terrible at his job, the Englishman is still hiring him to do it because he's cheap. So who is really the true fool there? So there's a certain level of comedy there that goes deeper than what we see on the surface, and you have to commend that. Now, these scenes that were edited out, I'm against editing them out. I think they must remain because they have a certain context. People at the time held certain beliefs. Removing those scenes disrupts the flow of the story. There is also this running gag in the show where you have this sergeant major, or a major in the British military. He's a veteran. He's an old man in the 1970s. He was probably in the First World War as well. But he is out of date. He's out of step with the feeling, the understanding of people in the 1970s. So Basil is somewhat attempting to understand him, to excuse his behavior because he's an old man. And there's a type of almost a grandfather or father type figure in this character, the major. He has lived in the hotel. He's basically lived in the hotel for I don't know how long, which is unusual. but there's a strong bond between Basil and the Major. So when the Major says something that's embarrassing for people, even in the 1970s, Basil attempts to redirect the conversation or attempt to protect the Major from his own embarrassment. And that's part of the comedy as well. So Basil Fawlty and Fawlty Towers are iconic because of the quality of the comedy. It's not superficial. It's multi-layered, and it shows how good the writing was. Of course, there are some scenes that are going to offend people, but that is to be seen in its context. We don't write that type of comedy today. It would be unacceptable today. And, there can be merit in saying we shouldn't write comedy like that today. But modifying something from the past, I think, goes down a dangerous road. Now, people will say, well, it's just a comedy show. Yes, and that's fine. At the end of the day, removing something from a show that, many people enjoyed has a limited amount of damage. But at what stage do we stop removing and editing history? Should we edit books? Should we remove references that we don't like or some people don't like? Should we remove even history itself? We have recordings of images and stories from the past. Should they be removed also? I'm not an advocate for that. Of course not. I think we need to look at history in its rawest form. So once again, I think the idea of removing these scenes from Fawlty Towers takes away from the comedy, takes away from the story, and attempts to paint or repaint the 1970s in a new light, which I don't think is correct. But I'm not an expert. I'm not all-knowing, of course, but I'd like to know your comments on this. They would be greatly appreciated. So let me know in the comment section. Thanks a lot, guys. Why not become a Patreon and enjoy access to our Discord server where we share news, chat, and have some fun? If you become a patron, you can also make video suggestions on topics that are important to you. Check it out via the link in the description.